You are watching the World 24/7 on the NDTV network. I'm Parmeshwar Bava. We've got an action-packed bulletin lined up for you. Let's begin with the top stories we're tracking currently. In a sharp response to the terrorist attack in Jammu and Kashmir's Pahalgam, India has announced a series of severe measures against Pakistan and decided to suspend the Indus Waters Treaty that governs the sharing of the river Indus's waters. The Atari border between India and Pakistan, located in Punjab, has been closed as part of retaliatory measures against Pakistan following the shocking terror attack in Pahalgam, the worst since the 2019 Pulwama strike. The US president has said that talks with China were active over a fair deal and that Beijing has expressed interest in negotiating a deal. Meanwhile, Beijing neared a deal with Brussels to ease sanctions against European lawmakers, signaling an emerging link between the EU and China, both of which face trade pressures from Trump's tariffs. Elon Musk-led Tesla sees India as a very hot market, but they have highlighted the 100% tariffs on automobiles, which it says makes customers anxious. More than 80% of the planet's coral reefs are affected by an ongoing bleaching event, which is the worst on record. Our big focus, the Cabinet Committee on Security, India's highest decision-making body on national security, has taken some strict and punishing measures against Pakistan over the cross-border linkages that have surfaced in the investigation over the dastardly terror attack in Jammu and Kashmir's Pahalgam, in which 26 people, including one foreign national, were killed. The boldest move has been to suspend the decades-old Indus Waters Treaty with Pakistan indefinitely. And with this, the water supply from the Indus River and its distributaries, which is the Jhelum, the Chenab, Ravi, Beas and Satluj, will be stopped. These rivers, you must note, are the water supply for Pakistan and impacts tens of millions of people in that country. In fact, the Indus Waters Treaty was signed back in 1960 in September. The pact was signed between India and Pakistan, with the World Bank brokering the agreement. But this treaty actually withstood 3 wars between India and Pakistan, back in 1965, 1971 and 1999, but it is now suspended indefinitely. We have a reaction from the Ministry of External Affairs regarding India's sharp response to the terrorist attack. Listen in.
The Indus Waters Treaty of 1960 will be held in abeyance with immediate effect until Pakistan credibly and irrevocably abjures its support for cross-border terrorism. 2. The integrated checkpost Atari will be closed with immediate effect. Those who have crossed over with valid endorsements may return through that route before 1 May 2025. 3. Pakistani nationals will not be permitted to travel to India under the SAARC visa exemption scheme visas. Any SVES visas issued in the past to Pakistani nationals are deemed cancelled. Any Pakistani national currently in India under SVES visa has 48 hours to leave India. 4. The Defence, Military, Naval and Air advisors in the Pakistani High Commission in New Delhi are declared persona non grata. They have a week to leave India. India will be withdrawing its own Defence, Navy and air advisors from the Indian High Commission in Islamabad. These posts in the respective High Commissions are deemed annulled. 5 support staff of the service advisors will also be withdrawn from both High Commissions. 5. The overall strength of the High Commissions will be brought down to 30 from the present 55 through further reductions to be effected by 1st May 2025. The CCS reviewed the overall security situation.
Well, Well, my colleague Sunil Prabhu has been tracking the finer developments for us. He joins us live at the moment. Sunil, we've just heard the Ministry of External Affairs' sharp response. Any immediate response from Pakistan, diplomatically, politically or publicly yet, as far as these latest moves are concerned, and also on the suspension of the Indus Waters Treaty?
Well, I think they have already responded just to keep our viewers updated. Firstly, the top diplomat, the senior-most diplomat in the Pakistan embassy in India has been summoned by the Ministry of External Affairs, and,
Yes.
the demarche that has been issued of persona non grata has been done. The Pakistan establishment has, through the army and the defense minister, first of all, have denied that they've been behind these terror attacks. They've also stated very categorically that they condemn it in all possible manners. But be that as it may, as you are well aware, our Cabinet Committee on Security has shown and very categorically stated that there are clear underpinnings of cross-border terrorism and support from Pakistan, and that's the reason for these strong steps. This will definitely have a huge impact on Indo-Pak relationships. It's always been at its low ever since Article 370 was promulgated, was removed in 2019. It has been a skeleton staff, now reducing it further to 30, scrapping the Indus Valley Treaty, the Water Treaty, which was done by the World Bank, which basically stops the water from going to Pakistan, will all have huge repercussions. It's in that backdrop, of course, that this is the first step that the Indian government, the Cabinet Committee on Security has taken. Today, an all-party meeting will be held where the Home Minister, the Defense Minister, as well as the External Affairs Minister will explain to all political parties about the steps India has taken, what they plan to do. They are expected to give a unanimous support to the government to act in whatever way it can to ensure the perpetrators of justice, perpetrators of this horrific, incident are brought to justice. And of course, there will be some questions asked about whether there was a security as well as intelligence lapse on the incident that has taken place. But nevertheless, at this present juncture, you can still see India is in a state of shock as well as mourning as their loved ones come back for their final rituals across the country.
Tragic losses indeed. Sunil, is it a concern that over 30 hours after this absolutely horrific massacre, all the terrorists responsible have still not been held accountable or found?
Well, it's given the terrain of Srinagar as well as the valley, it's not going to be immediate. They have already been able to give sketches of those militants who were responsible for this, and there is an NIA team which is trying to find things. It will take time, but definitely, hopefully, our security agencies will be able to get those who are responsible and those who are behind this entire conspiracy and responsible for such a horrific incident are brought to justice.
As always, Sunil, thank you so much for joining us with the latest. India is now said to have handed over the formal persona non grata note for Pakistan's military diplomats. How unprecedented are all these latest moves, including that suspension of a World Bank brokered Indus Water Treaty? What are the broader geopolitical ramifications, sir? And are we actually looking at an immediate impact, or do we have to wait a few years?
There will be no immediate impact. These 5 different steps announced by the government of India. If you take the Indus Waters Treaty, it will have no legal significance or meaning because holding a bilateral treaty in abeyance will not free India from its legal commitments.
Right.
So we have to be clear that the Modi government was under public pressure to respond to the horrific terrorist attack in Pahalgam. This is the worst terrorist attack on civilians since the Mumbai terror attacks of 2008. In fact, the attack in Pahalgam, where Hindus were singled out and slaughtered, that attack had some shades of what happened in 1990 when Islamists in the Kashmir Valley expelled the native Hindu minority by killing hundreds of Hindus. So, unfortunately, what we are seeing in the Kashmir Valley is an attempt to bring the valley back to the dark days of 1990.
Right.
All this put pressure on the government of India to respond. There were calls for retribution. Now, the 5 steps that the government of India has announced, of course, are not a substitute for what it has resolved to do. It has resolved to bring the perpetrators of the Pahalgam attack to justice, as well as their sponsors. So, the announcement yesterday of 5 steps should be seen only as a first move toward making Pakistan pay for the Pahalgam attack.
So you say that these latest moves by the government are largely symbolic because it's going to be taking a few years to come into action, and it is understood that Prime Minister Modi's government is under immense pressure. But sir, is India's tough response likely to isolate Pakistan further diplomatically or risk pushing regional relations into a deeper freeze, especially with China also watching closely? What's your take?
Well, China has become the main backer of Pakistan today. It's propping up the Pakistani state. It's playing the role that the US played for many decades when it propped up Pakistan as a counterweight to India, providing Pakistan with military hardware, with all kinds of assistance. The same role China is playing today.
Well, crucial updates on the other side of this very short commercial break. Do stay tuned. We're back in a moment. Well, US President Donald Trump has appeared to soften his recent comments on China and the head of the US Federal Reserve after recent clashes as he pursues his economic agenda. Trump said he has no intention of firing Jerome Powell after repeatedly criticizing the head of the central bank, but added that he would like Mr. Powell to be a little more active on cutting interest rates. In fact, he said the level of tariffs or import taxes that he had imposed on Chinese imports would come down substantially, but he also added it will not be zero. For further clarity on the matter, let's go across to Chicago. Joining us live at the moment, Dr. Richard Benkin. Sir, thank you so much, as always, for your time. Trump says tariffs won't be zero, but will come down substantially. What does this signal about his leverage strategy and also goals in his trade reset?
Well, first of all, of course, thank you for having me on. I appreciate it when you do. I don't think what he said is anything different than what he'd been saying before. I really would find it difficult that anyone would think China would continue to have 254% tariffs on their goods coming into the United States. However, when that number comes down, it's only going to come down as a result of negotiation. And as we know, the president put tariffs on China not just because of trade imbalances, not just because of Chinese tariffs, but because of unfair trade practices and because of China's role in the fentanyl epidemic that's hitting the United States.
Right.
So I don't think President Trump's comments really are anything new or significant.
In the backdrop of the unfair trade practices that you just cited, and given the 145% tariff escalation though, sir, are we past the point of reversible damage as far as the US-China trade standoff is concerned? Or would you say this provides a little breathing room for diplomacy?
Perhaps it does. However, I believe that there's been severe damage already. And the damage really has been on the Chinese side. And I'm not just saying this because I'm an American. I mean, the fact is, China recently said they were open to negotiations, but only after trying everything they could to avoid negotiations. Yes, they're having a few talks now with the Europeans on one or two matters, but his charm offensive to Europe failed. He went to allies Japan, South Korea, failed. He even went into his own backyard, Vietnam, and other countries, Southeast Asia, and was rebuffed again. But and in fact, even Pakistan, which is essentially a Chinese vassal state at this point, is now talking to the United States about importing more U.S. oil to address the trade imbalances. However, I think the final straw is that with what happened this week with the United States and India.
Right.
China has lost a lot of market share during this immediate period. But I think watching the events in India told Xi that, you didn't just lose it, you might not get it back. And the problem he's facing right now is unemployment's up. Other economic indicators are down in China. There's a ton of goods that are unsold, and they're losing money every day. He doesn't have a lot of time to conclude this. And of course, as we know, though they're having some talks right now, the United States is negotiating with other nations first, and President Trump made it clear that he would make these agreements with our friends and allies first. So China only has a certain amount of time before they're going to suffer irreparable harm.
Right. Many actually point out that if this is Donald Trump signaling room for compromise, they're actually questioning what it says about the strength or, in fact, strain of the Chinese economy. But always a pleasure to hear your views, Dr. Benkin. Thank you so much for making time for us on NDTV.
Thank you so much.
Meanwhile, Beijing neared a deal with Brussels to ease sanctions against European lawmakers, signaling an emerging closeness between the EU and China, both of which face trade pressure from the United States. Beijing actually hopes its decision to remove the restrictions will reopen talks over an investment pact that was torpedoed by the EU imposing sanctions on Chinese entities over alleged human rights violations in the Muslim-majority region of Xinjiang. But the EU and China were at loggerheads just a few months ago. But faced with hefty tariffs from the US, they have reportedly opened discussions on reducing electric vehicle tariffs. And Beijing, by the way, has pushed a charm offensive across the bloc, though that latter effort has so far been to little avail. Well, let's turn our attention now to what's happening as far as Tesla in India is concerned. Elon Musk-led Tesla sees India as a very hot market, but of course, there's a disclaimer here. They are actually concerned about the 100% tariffs on automobiles, which they say make customers anxious. The US auto giant continues to evaluate the timing of its entry into India's promising market, according to Tesla's chief financial officer, Vaibhav Taneja's statement. But as you know, and as we've been covering, Tesla has long sought to establish a presence in India, which is the world's third largest automotive market. However, the exceptionally high tariffs, which CEO Elon Musk says are amongst the world's highest, remain a significant obstacle. As you know, recent developments show Tesla securing showroom locations in India, also advertising numerous job positions over LinkedIn, indicating progress towards market entry. In fact, import records reveal that Tesla brought a Model Y vehicle from Germany to India in March this year, valued at about $46,000 for shipping purposes. And with that, let's turn our attention now to battleground Canada, where Prime Minister Mark Carney-led Liberal Party could be on its way to secure a clear majority in the upcoming federal election happening on the 28th of this month in Canada. This is as per YouGov's claims. After trailing the Conservatives for months, it is now being claimed that the Liberals have surged ahead, and they are expected to secure a win on projected 182 seats, enough for a 21-seat majority. So it's fair to say that this shift marks a major political comeback. But it's over to Maha Siddiqui for the latest from Vancouver with a special segment, Canada Election Watch.
Many thanks, Parmeshwar. And this is very closely linked to what we were just discussing on the channel with regards to President Donald Trump, the threats coming in from the US as far as economic coercion and tariffs are concerned, as well as the annexation threats that have put Mark Carney in the position that he's at the current moment, barely a few months into politics. And this is the man a banker, an economist, a former governor of Bank of Canada and Bank of England, who is now poised to become the Prime Minister yet again, if we go by the opinion polls that have been coming through, most of them giving the Liberal Party a clear majority. Some of the opinion polls are now suggesting that the Conservatives may have closed in the gap a bit, but even then, the Liberals are well on their way to be able to form a government. And this is largely on the perception of Mark Carney himself as a person who the Canadians in the current moment believe is best placed to take on US President Donald Trump. In fact, Mark Carney has been campaigning here in British Columbia, in the province I am in. He was in Victoria today. And what he has been saying is that once the election results are out and he becomes the Prime Minister, he is going to have an in-person meeting with President Donald Trump. Questions were asked whether he would travel to Washington, D.C. for that meeting. And he said that it's early to say that. However, an in-person meeting is the best way of being able to negotiate. And that is what the Canadians here at the moment believe, that he is best placed to be able to do some tough talking with President Trump and be able to negotiate a good deal for Canada. Remember when Trump had his first phone call with Mark Carney in the 3 weeks that he was Prime Minister, before he announced snap polls in Canada, he did not refer to him as the governor of Canada or refer to Canada as the 51st state of the United States of America, like he did with former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. This gave a sense that President Trump was willing to take Mark Carney more seriously, and that he perhaps would be willing to negotiate a better deal for Canada, that Mark Carney would be able to negotiate a better deal for Canada. It now appears pretty much certain that the trade deal that already exists in North America, which is called CUSMA in Canada, which was earlier known as NAFTA, which was renegotiated during President Trump's previous tenure, is once again set to perhaps see a makeover with the tariff threats continuing to dangle on Canada. But clearly, this is the major motivator for voters to come out and cast their ballots in large numbers, as we've seen in advance polling. And this is largely because the threat from the US remains one of the biggest reasons that the Canadians want to vote and give a clear majority in this two-horse race now between the Liberals and the Conservatives.
As always, thank you so much for joining us with the latest developments and the lowdown. In fact, a record number of nearly 7.3 million Canadian citizens have participated in early voting ahead of this April 28 federal election. So advance voting over the last 4 odd days has shattered records in Canada. With that, let's turn our attention to the other story we're tracking on NDTV. US President Donald Trump declared that Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has no cards to play in a stinging rebuke after the Ukrainian president rejected his framework for peace. I'll tell you why this is very significant. The US presented Ukraine with its final offer for peace last week, which actually includes US recognition of Crimea as Russian territory and no possibility of NATO membership for Ukraine. But Zelensky has gone on to reject that proposal.
I think Russia is ready, and a lot of people said Russia wanted to go for the whole thing. And I think we have a deal with Russia. We have to get a deal with Zelensky, and I hope that Zelensky, I thought it might be easier to deal with Zelensky. So far it's been harder, but that's okay.
In other news, the European Union has ordered Apple and Meta to pay a combined €700 million fine in the first fines it has issued under legislation intended to curb the power of big tech. It has issued a €500 million fine to Apple over its App Store, while Meta has been fined €200 million over how much choice users had to consent to data collection. The two tech firms, by the way, have reacted angrily, with Meta accusing the EU of attempting to handicap successful American businesses, and Apple saying it was being unfairly targeted and forced to give away our technology for free. You must note the fines are lower than some of those issued by the EU in the past, but given the heightened economic tensions with America, still risk angering US President Donald Trump. And in the splendor of St. Peter's Basilica, with the sunshine glinting across the bronze canopy that towers over the main altar, Thousands of Catholic pilgrims streamed in to glimpse the body of Pope Francis on the first of 3 days lying in state. After lying in state for 3 days, the funeral will be held outside in St. Peter's Square beginning at 10 a.m. local time on Saturday. In fact, US President Donald Trump, French President Emmanuel Macron, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer and outgoing German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, as well as the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, are among the major European leaders traveling to the Vatican for the same. Well, we end this bulletin on a stark note because more than 80% of the planet's coral reefs are actually affected by an ongoing bleaching event, which is the worst on record. Corals have a symbiotic relationship with certain colorful algae which live in their tissues, in case you don't know. And when the corals become stressed, often by heat or pollutants, they expel the algae, leaving the coral pale and colorless. Record high temperatures have led to a 2-year worldwide bleaching event, which has now hit reefs in at least 82 countries or territories. In fact, I must inform you that US government data shows Australia's Great Barrier Reef has in fact had 6 bleaching events in 9 years. Reefs are home to much of the ocean's biodiversity, and while they can recover from bleaching, prolonged events can kill the coral entirely, and more than 80% of the planet's coral reefs are affected by this ongoing bleaching event. Thank you so much for investing your time and watching this edition of The World 24/7. As always, we'll keep tracking the latest for you. Do stay tuned.